All right, I think we're live. It's all live, very good. What a great pleasure to be here. A warm welcome to everyone who's joining the live session. And another very special occasion because it's the first time we're running a webinar together with my colleague and friend, Tiziana Tucci, whose name I still have a hard time pronouncing because of her very international background. So Tiziana, she is with EU training for about a year now, and she's our master expert coach who trains and helps candidates with competency-based interviews and SCBIs and assessment center exercises. So very warm welcome to Tiziana.
Thank you very much, András. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Sorry about my voice, okay, but still I'm here and happy to follow that session with you. Thank you.
That's excellent. We really appreciate that. And it's definitely not COVID you have, but it's winter time, which affects probably all of our voices and general mood. But we're bringing a lot of energy to today's session. And it's great that we have our team in Budapest who's helping in the back, Lenke and Veronica. We're really grateful to them for putting this together. And they are assisting with any technical question you may have. So I'd like to make sure that you have the audio, video, everything works smoothly. In the vast majority of cases, you will solve most technical problems by restarting your browser, or perhaps in more difficult cases, restarting your internet connection. This usually solves the vast majority of problems. As a backup option, you can have an app or mobile device and follow the webinar through the dedicated app. You will need an access code, which I believe was communicated to you beforehand. So all of that should be working fine. And very importantly, we are recording this session. Recording will be available along with the slides, but certainly you get the great benefit in the live session that you get to ask questions from me or from Tiziana. And in the very end, we'll give you a special discount code. If you would like to use or sign up to our paid services, you're more than welcome at a special rate. So with that, we'll get started. And as always, you can put questions into the chat box. We will try to filter those and try to answer as many as we can. If there are a couple of questions we may not be able to or do not have time for, then we'll follow up in some written form or a Q&A memo or something similar. So with that, I think we can get started. And looking at the assessment center, generally any issue related to the AC is more than welcome. Put those questions into the chat box, share it with other candidates. We are really grateful for not just listening to us, but having some peer-to-peer conversation with fellow candidates. And then we will especially focus today on the so-called SCBI, which is a unique development. I wouldn't say extremely new, but rather new in comparative terms, because it was introduced, well, I'd say a couple of months, but perhaps more accurate to say a couple of weeks ago by EPSO, given the nature of the assessment center and how they reacted or adapted to the coronavirus situation, where in-person meetings are risky and often just impossible. So with that, here's a quick poll I'd like you to answer, and I asked Lenke to help with the technical side. Just tell us, have you ever taken part in an assessment center, whether it was an EPSO or a different one, or you've never had the pleasure of taking part in an AC, as it's often referred to. So please make a vote. I even prompts to me, I'd rather not click it because it might just mess up the system. So rather, let's just have everyone answer the question. Lenke, perhaps we could keep it open for a moment or two, and then we can see the results just out of curiosity and to keep everyone engaged. And in the meantime, of course, you're welcome to think about any question related to assessment centers, interviews, group exercise, SCBI, and all the rest, which we will tackle as we go along. So Lenke, if we could close the poll, and then we can move on with the presentation. And as I see the results, the vast majority of those at the live session have not taken ever part in an assessment center, which is absolutely fine. and some others have, I'd say, just by looking at the numbers, roughly 1/5 of those participating. So good, let's go on. If we could switch back, please, to the presentation. Excellent, very good. And let's look at the most recent development while you are considering your questions, is how or what sort of changes has EPSO introduced or is to some degree still introducing to the assessment center. So the most important change indeed is what you see on the screen, that currently the environment is purely online. So there's no in-person assessment center happening in Brussels or Luxembourg, as it happened a few times before. So there's no in-person testing taking place or in-person exams for the assessment center, but everything is happening online. So the environment is purely online platforms. There is no more group exercise, or at least, again, whatever I'm telling you is in the context of the COVID situation, which I believe from EPSO's perspective will last pretty much until the second half of this year, but chances are even the entire 2021. And while these measures are in application, there's no group exercise because that would require the physical presence. And even online, though most of you are probably attending Zoom and Google Meet and Hangouts and whatever calls on a daily basis, still it would be too risky from an equal access and technological standpoint to organize an online group exercise in which someone's connection might drop or someone might have some other technical difficulties, and that truly changes the entire dynamic of the exercise and would make that invalid. So they're no longer doing it online. And then comes the novelty, the so-called Scbi. So we're going to look at it in more detail, why that was added or what are the differences between the competency-based interview and then the situational competency-based interview, which is the Scbi. I don't know, Tiziana, if you'd like to add anything to these intro remarks, or you have any comments on that. I think you're on mute. There you go. Please.
Yeah, thank you. So the Scbi is the hot thing in the moment, right? So it's a good opportunity to talk about it because there are so many changes. I've been checking here the questions related to Scbi, and we have good things to talk about. So let's move forward. I don't want to talk about something previously, before you say something. So
yeah. There's still a lot to say when it comes to the format, the best practices, and a lot of experience that you have gained in the past weeks and months training candidates for this particular exam. So I see that there are quite a few questions already coming in. We'll tackle them very shortly, but I'd like to still say a few words about this new online platform on which the assessment centers actually run. So the platform is not really a platform. It's more about a conversation channel, more of a medium, and it's done through Skype for Business, which is similar to the classic Skype. Make sure you download it, you install it, and you get familiar. The interface is nothing special. It's pretty straightforward. Approximately 2 weeks before the actual test, you are required to do a connectivity trial with an EPSO assistant. So you should be in the same place where you are going to sit the actual live conversation and the live exam. So if you do that somewhere else, make sure you go to that place where the exam will be, and you're not testing your home connection when the exam you're actually doing someplace else. And then about a week before the test date, you will receive an invitation with all the details that you need. And there could be different parts of the assessment center in the online setting, and they don't necessarily take place on the same day. So they do try to group these together, and you might have a sequence, or it might be on two connected but still separate days. And then the computer-based tests are still at test centers. So if your assessment center includes a computer-based tests, and this typically happens for specialist competitions. So if you are required to sit that, then you are, at least currently, required to go to a test center where you book the date, and there you sit the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning tests, which are typically being conducted there. Right. No group exercise. So those of you who are somewhat familiar with the assessment center would know that typically there is a case study, there is a group exercise, there is a competency-based interview, and there could be other tests such as an oral presentation or a specialist interview. Now, in the current setup, this is somewhat mixed up, somewhat changed, namely that there's no group exercise for the very reasons I previously mentioned. And those candidates, if you are among those candidates who had already done their group exercise because it was the pre-COVID times or there was still a period when it was possible, and your competition is still ongoing, so you've done that part, but the competition itself has not concluded, reserve list is not out yet. In that case, the group exercise score will just no longer count. So that's a little unfortunate, but that is something to bear in mind. And then you will need to complete an additional test in that case, which is namely the Scbi, the Situational Competency-Based Interview. So that is something we'll look at in much more depth of what actually that is. So I see that many questions coming in, but let me cover the Scbi and then I'll pause a little bit and come back to some of these questions, and we'll have more of a proper Q&A and a conversation around it. So the first thing is, and it's an interview. It's an interview where they measure general competencies that you have by asking how you would react in a specific situation. And the most important difference between, I could say, the old CBI, the old competency-based interview, or as it's sometimes referred to, structured interview, versus the SCBI, the Situational Competency-Based Interview, is that in the SCBI, you're given a background briefing, and we'll talk about that in a second, what that looks like. And you are requested to do some sort of a role play and base all your answers on how you would react in the context of that background documentation. Whereas in the classic competency-based interview, you would need to bring examples from your own professional background. So the CBI, so the old one, was really about your personal, but rather professional experience and making sure that you can come up with good examples to demonstrate the existence of a certain competency. Whereas in this new SCBI, it's framed around the briefing that you are given beforehand. So that's a very important distinction because you need to place yourself in a new situation. But obviously, it's about you. It's about your competencies. It's about how you would react in a given situation. And that is the key word, is how you would react. What would you do in a given situation? So there's a lot of hypotheticals, but it's still about the way you think, the way you would act, the way you would approach a problem is what matters the most.
Exactly. May I add something here?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, so when we think about the CBI, we think about the STAR model, right? Which is situation, task, action, and results. Now that we are talking about SCBI, and it's something that we would do, so how we would act, it's really focused on the A letter, okay? So it's action. And this is, I saw a question here related to that. In that sense, you have to focus on your action. So what would you do? You have to really step into the role that they are offering you in the scenario that they offer you, and how would you react or act, exactly in that scenario, in that context.
No, that's a very important point. Thank you very much. So going further, what's SCBI? And I see some questions coming in about if your competition has CBI or SCBI, how that compares. We'll try to come back to that. But just to cover the basic understanding about the SCBI, what can you expect? So what happens for the SCBI is a couple of weeks before, usually 2 to 3 weeks before the interview, you're actually getting the assignment pack. So that's a pretty good thing, because you do have quite a lot of time to analyze it, to process it, to turn that into a more condensed and clear document based on your own analysis and some methodology that we'll share with you. And you'll need to typically replace a colleague in a situation, and then the questions will be framed around that situation. So you step into a certain position and they will ask you about how would you react or handle an issue or a challenge in a given situation. And then during the interview, some new situations may come in. So it's not like everything is limited to the background document, but saying, okay, well, let's suppose that and there's this development, there's this unexpected thing, there is a new piece of information. How would you react to that? So that issue is also part of the interview. So it's a little less constrained, it's a little less closed than the classic competency-based interview would be. And then the interviewer follows a script, but it's more of a semi-documented, semi-structured script. So they can reflect on what you say. They can ask you follow-up questions. It can be fairly dynamic. It's not like it's a linear set of questions that they need to fire at you, but it's something which is more fluid and more dynamic, which obviously makes it more difficult from a candidate standpoint. And yet it really tests the way you react in a situation and explaining how you would approach a problem. And then the assessors, they typically expect short and concise answers. Now, some of you might be very to the point and direct in your communication style. Others may be a little more loquacious and like to explain things. It's worth practicing. So if you know about yourself that you sometimes meander and just give very lengthy answers, that's something, it's a kind of a skill that you might want to already focus on and try to improve with a communications coach or similar. The reason I'm telling you this is because you might start a very long-winded answer, and then the assessors would cut you off in the middle, and then your answer will get a low score. So that can really hurt your performance, because there's relatively little time for quite a few questions. So really getting to the point becomes an important aspect. And then the very reason for that is the number of questions you can expect. It can be anything between 15 or 20 questions, which if you consider that it's typically 30 to 40 minutes, it's rather fast-paced. So that requires a deep understanding of the file, but then again, your ability to express your views and answers in a very structured and target-oriented way. And then finally, many of these questions will obviously be follow-up. So again, it's not they're following a very linear script, but it's dynamic based on your answers. Anything to add, Tiziana?
No, it's exactly like that. So it's very dynamic. They do consider, of course, your recommendation, because normally at the assignment, you do have two topics for you to provide normally a recommendation or give some priorities regarding the recommendations, okay? And then they are going to make questions related to what you are bringing to the discussion, right? For sure, they need to check all the competencies for all the candidates, but that can vary a little bit, the questions, which questions they're going to make to each candidate, because they are considering also what everyone is bringing to the interview, the context.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much. So in terms of what you need to know, and then I do promise we'll get to the questions that keep flowing in. So one very important thing is that there are not necessarily right or wrong answers, because a problem statement, or let's say, how would you resolve a dispute between two colleagues? How would you react if the deadline was advanced by 2 days unexpectedly because the European Commissioner's agenda has been changed? So in that sort of situations, there are different ways of solving a problem. So it's very real in the sense that this is not like a multiple choice quiz or mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4. There's only one good answer. It's much closer to problem solving in general, where the same challenge can be tackled really from multiple perspectives. And that is exactly what they are looking for. So they really would like to know how you would approach a challenge. So the way you think matters more than finding the best option. And because of that, there are no best or worst answers. Now, certainly there could be relatively poor answers to a given problem. So if you say, well, there are two people having a disagreement in your team, how would you resolve that? You say, I would go to court and sue them. That's probably not a very good answer. So saying something along the lines, I would try to mediate, or I'll try to bring in different incentives, or I would try to persuade them as a team of two or separately in different conversations. There could be really a host of ways of approaching a problem. And again, there's certainly a scale of some solutions might be better, others might be worse, but it's not like this is the solution or the answer that they are looking for. And then how you justify and build your arguments is really what matters. And again, it's more the problem-solving process than the solution. Let me be very poetic. The journey, not the destination, right? So how do you get to somewhere? The way you process it is what you need to describe to the assessors. Just kind of totally off topic, but it reminds me, many years ago, it was famous or rather infamous how Google interviewed candidates, and they would ask. There was this question that everybody was just quite shocked about: how many golf balls fit in a car? And nobody really knew how many golf balls fit in a car. It depends on the model and depends on some factors. But it's really, they were looking for, how would you solve this problem? What would be your approach? And saying, well, this is probably the size of a car. This is the probable size of a golf ball. Here is how I would calculate, subtract, and whatever. So it's, again, the thinking process that you need to describe. And actually, that's somewhat good news. Because if you actually don't know the answer, it's a good way to answer that, well, I don't know the exact number figure answer, but here is how I would try to find out. Here is how I would approach the problem. And that is exactly what they're looking for. And then last but not least, so previous knowledge is not required. So you're not you're not expected to know anything about the EU, about the given policy or the given context. Having said that, of course it helps. Of course, we very much encourage you to do your background reading, to do your homework, to try to look into the file as best as you can. You have the time, since you are given that file 2 to 3 weeks before the actual exam. And you can Google around, you can check commission websites, you can find resources, try to talk to people who are in that area. You want to have a more comprehensive picture. So you definitely want to do that, but this is not formally required. It's not a knowledge-based test. It's not that they ask you a specific piece of information from outside the background documents.
Yeah.
Go ahead. In the meantime, I'll be just scanning the incoming questions, which Lenka is kind enough to feed me, and I know we are number 17, if I count correctly. Let me pick a few while you give your perspective, Tiziana.
Okay, fine. So what I would like to add is that exactly what András said about the experience. This is not what they are going to assess you. They are going to assess you in terms of behavioral competencies. Okay. So just to give you an example, when we had the competition law back in November, December, there was something in the assignment that talked about the copyright law. Okay. Of course, all of them were lawyers, and they said, do I have to know about the copyright law because I'm not an expert on that field? And no, the aim is not to know anything about the copyright law, but how you deal with that information in relation to the other information and facts that you have in the context, in the assignment itself. Of course, in the Scbi, you are allowed to look for external information to provide you, maybe some for you to be more confident while you were speaking. So my recommendation was, if you feel more confident and to understand better about the copyright law, but not in a deeper way, you can have a look about it, and to understand a little bit about it. But the aim of the exercise is not for you to discuss the copyright law, but then to discuss how this initiative could impact the assignment itself. Okay, so that was something that I want them to pay attention and to be aware of, because normally when we are experts, we want to go deeper into a specific subject. So pay attention to that. Another thing that I would like to do to connect is the role of the interviewer. So the person who is there talking to you, it's only an interviewer. He's not an assessor, okay? Besides that person that is going to interact with you, we're going to have two people, and they are going to be the assessors. No cameras, just their names, and they're not going to interact with you, okay? So the interviewer who will be there interacting with you, he has two roles. So one of the role is basically just the interviewer. So he or she just going to make questions to you, okay? The one that András said about the example between the conflict of colleagues, how would you manage that situation? So this is possible. Another possibility is for that person to step into a role and ask you also to step into the role, and then instead of talking about the situation, you have to act into the situation, okay? So really take the role. In that sense, just using the example that András brought about the conflict between the colleagues, the person just simply could step up, could step in the conversation, said, okay, I am the employee who is not happy at all, and what would you do in that sense? You see, so then they can interact, and then they are going to asking you to provide motivation, leadership, working with others. For instance, those three competencies there, they are assessing, but then in a way that you are acting those competencies and not just talking about them. Okay, so that's what I would like to add.
Great, thank you very much. So let me look at a couple of questions that came in no particular order. And as I said before, whatever we cannot answer now, we'll try to find a way to follow up in some shape or form after today's live session. So here's one on how will the oral presentation work in the online assessment center format. This is something we don't know yet. So I think EPSO is still working on it, of figuring out whether they can put a virtual whiteboard with some application, or how they could get you to do this kind of exercises. Now, obviously, from a technological standpoint, this is very easy these days. There are a lot of apps and different different ways. Even in this very platform we're using, I could easily put a whiteboard, but certainly they need to comply with a lot of technical and equal access requirements. So they're still looking into it. We do not know at this stage. Here's another one. In the CBI, so the classic competency-based interview, should we have in mind 10 or 5 so-called anchors per competence? And I would not probably spend any particular time on this, because the CBI is currently not relevant for our purposes. Yeah, there are a couple of so-called indicators or anchors, but rather usually looking at around 5 that you can frame your answers around for the classic CBI. Here's another one. Should we follow the STAR method? I think Tiziana mentioned earlier. So really focus on action and much less on anything else from the so-called STAR method in the situational competency-based answers. Any suggestion to remain updated for EU-related developments, newspapers about or what news on member state and EU-wide news, hard to find? Well, if you want to be up to date, just to know the broader EU context, you probably want to read Politico's daily emails, the Playbook, or EU Observer, or some EU-focused outlet. They do a pretty good job following the news, perhaps even too detailed for the purposes of an assessment center, but occasionally reading up on what's going on is helpful because you understand the file better and quicker. Okay, case study happening online or necessarily in a test center. The case study actually seems to be still happening in test centers. So it's computer-based, as you know, there's an interface there, there's background documents, but it's still happening at test centers right now, as far as we know. Again, we'll see whether that might change or not, but as long as this works, we believe this will stay so despite the COVID challenges. Here's another one. What about the field-related interview? connected to Scbi. So Tiziana, I resort to you. Where does the field related interview come in the context of the situational competency based interview?
Actually, they have nothing to do. Okay, those are very different tests. So one is really Scbi is really focused on the behavioral competencies, and field interview is really related of your expertise. So it's based on the talent screener, and they are going to check your expertise on the field. It's completely different.
Online as well, right? So the field related interview.
Exactly, online.
Yeah. So I think these are the two main points indeed. So these are two separate kind of tests. The field-related interview is very much based on your professional background and even to some degree your knowledge, your understanding of your field of expertise. And it's happening online, I believe, through the same platform and through in the same context. It's part of the assessment center and it's happening online.
Yeah, in that sense, the knowledge of the EU, especially in your field, it's very important. Okay, because then you have a specific knowledge and how you can also apply that knowledge to what's going on in your specific field. This is related to the field interview.
Yeah. Here's one question, which I'm again throwing at you, Tiziana. How do you actually practice getting to the point?
So, as we know the STAR model, okay, so a good practice is to put your answer on the STAR model first, because then you're very straight to the point, STAR, okay? And when you're going to talk just about the actions, then you just focus on the actions, that's it, okay? A good also a way for you to prepare yourself is to record yourself. Because normally when we are talking, we are not that 100% aware of the way we speak, and also if we speak too much, if we speak too not too much. So my advice for you would be record yourself. If you don't feel comfortable to do just with yourself, with your phone, you can schedule a meeting with a friend, with a colleague, and then you can record that meeting. And by that recording, you can also assess yourself. Self-awareness is super important when we talk about selection process, okay?
Yeah, I fully agree. And interestingly, as soon as you know that there's a camera rolling, even if it's only you in the room and you use your phone or whatever device to record yourself, it probably forces you to be a little more self-conscious and also to be more to the point, more succinct. And especially if you put a timer to yourself and tell yourself, I need to answer this within 2 minutes. It's amazing how quickly 2 minutes can pass by. And in a live exam setting, when you're a little more excited, a little less self-aware, you are trying to bring a lot of information to the fore, you can easily go beyond 2 minutes. So making sure that you practice that in a safe environment first, and then perhaps with a colleague or perhaps with a coach or trainer, and you really practice being more focused in your answers. Here's a question about technical aspect. What happens if the connection drops? What happens if there's an outage in any of these? After 10 minutes, so if there is an outage which lasts more than 10 minutes, then EPSO will reschedule the interview or that phase of the competition where they couldn't establish the connection with you. But if it's less than 10 minutes, and most problems tend to be resolved within that time frame, then they continue and they add that time to your planning or to your allocated time. So usually best practice is you have your internet at home or wherever you want to sit the exam. And then there's a backup line, which is typically the phone line, which also tends to have internet. And then you can switch over to your phone or use your phone as a hotspot and then use it for your computer. And actually right now where I am, and I'm hoping the connection will be fine, but I have my backup system. It's our studio in Brussels at the Ambiorix Square, which is a stone throw from the Commission's headquarters. We actually have this very studio available for anyone who would like to sit an EPSO competition. We charge a small fee for that. and then you have proper lighting and microphone and everything else. Obviously, we make sure that we respect all the rules to the letter. So we're not going to help you here. We're not going to assist you in any way. It's just basically providing a silent, soundproofed space with a good microphone, with a good camera, with good lighting and good internet to help you perform your best at the competition. So with that, a couple other questions. So here's a question. Is the SCBI needed for the 85 competition too? Yes, it is needed because it replaces the group exercise. And 85, again, I'm not sure which exact 85 competition you talk about, but as long as there was or is a group exercise and the exam has not concluded yet, then you will need to sit an SCBI because it replaces the group exercise element. And I'll take one more before we move on. Is there going to be an email generally informing us when will the assessment center be resumed? We're a bit in the dark currently. Yes, we're constantly monitoring all sources and resources. So we'll definitely let you know as soon as a competition resumes or whenever they launch the next phase or online phase. So you'll definitely hear from us, but normally EPSO should let you know as well, though typically they would put some message into your EPSO profile and not necessarily send an email. But again, if you are signed up to our newsletters or Facebook groups or other, you'll definitely hear it from us as well. So let me move on a little bit, and I know there are more questions coming in. We'll try to answer those as best as we can, but just to cover a couple other points related specifically to the SCBI is what is it that EPSO assessors will be looking for? As Tiziana mentioned, it's really behavior and not your past or not your expertise that they try to assess. So they'll be looking at the way you react, the way you think, the way you problem solve in the context of the background briefing. And you are assessed on the so-called classic competencies, so analyzing, problem solving, leadership, resilience, communication, working with others, and the rest, which are fairly widely known. And make sure certainly to look at the different competencies and have a good understanding of what each of them actually means. So a couple other tips to succeed. So you definitely want to read the background assignment very carefully. And not just read it, but you want to practice with it perhaps, or try to, again, create a virtual setting in which you can have a conversation with a colleague or a friend who acts as if they were the person in charge at the exam. If you're in doubt, ask the interviewer at the live session. So this is not about the practice, but at the actual live interview, you can ask them questions. It's not a dynamic where the interviewer is the person above you in a hierarchy. Certainly they are the interviewer, they are testing you, evaluating you. But it's still, for the sake of the role play, there is a dynamic between the two of you. So you're even encouraged to ask them a question to specify something or to clarify something, or to say, do you mean it from this perspective? Or does the context allow the following thing? You want to interact with the interviewer. And as we said before, in your preparation, you can do a bit of background reading. You can understand the context at a deeper level. So you can use other information sources as well, because even the briefing typically says you need to rely mostly on the background information, or it's framed within the context of the background information, but it's not exclusive. So outside information can enter the conversation. So you can use a lot of common sense and other information. And during the interview, you can consult your notes and the assignment pack, but no external help. You're not going to start Googling around. You're not going to ask someone who's standing in the door. Obviously, this has to be a serious exam where only your performance matters, but you can use those the background file during the interview. Anything else to add?
Yes, András, you talked about someone in the room. So what they do, the interview SCBI took 40 minutes, okay? The first 10 minutes, it's like they want to check your ID, they explain the rules, of the SCBI, and they check the room that you are in. So they ask you to move your camera to check if there's no one there, and for you to show all the room for them. Okay, so
Mhm.
this is something that I think it's important to say as well.
Right. I'm just looking at all the other questions that we're going to be answering in a moment. So what about the competencies? So it's just making a clear distinction for everyone who's not dealt with assessment centers before of what competencies are and what knowledge is. So knowledge is typically almost anything you can Google these days would be considered knowledge, whereas competency is something that you inherently have. It's a skill, it's an ability, it's a behavior where your communication skills, that's a competence. Your analyzing and problem solving skills is considered a competence. The way you interact with others is a competence. So it's about the way you would react in a given situation. Now, the question you see as an example on the left side, this is for the classic competency-based interview, where they directly want to know about your competence. For the situational competency-based interview, this all happens, let's say, a bit more indirectly, where they ask you to react to a challenge, to a problem, to a question, and within the lines is where they will assess your competency.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to put that on the screen, have it for the record, the 7+1 EPSO competencies that are being tested in all assessment center exams are the ones on the screen. So from analyzing, communication, delivering quality and results, learning, development, resilience, what do we have? Working with others, and then leadership, which is only for AD roles, for AD positions, but not for ASD, so not for assistant and secretary roles. And then typically how they used to do the assessment center, so which competency was tested by which particular exam, and this is changing to the degree that they are replacing group exercise with Scbi. So this matrix is looking or will be looking somewhat differently in the context of the online editions and the online version of assessment centers. But the bottom line is that every single competency, so all those 8, will be tested by 2 separate exams, which are all part of the assessment center. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Shisiana.
I think it's interesting to say that Scbi is replacing the group exercise, as you said, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But they have some similarities, okay? Because for the group exercise was really, and this is a good news, because the group exercise was really how you interact with the colleagues and how you discuss, how you analyze, how you prioritize, and not the result itself, okay, of the meeting, of the assignment that was proposed at that time. Now it's quite the same, but you are doing just by yourself, okay? But still, it's, as you said about the journey, okay, it's like Scbi is the journey. Group exercise was also about the journey. That's what I want to say, and we have this kind of connection, and maybe it will be more comfortable for you to know, okay, it's not something out of the blue. It's something that has some kind of connection, and also the competences, they are assessing the same competences. So this is something good news.
Yeah. I'd like to quickly address 2 questions, which I think are quite relevant. One is to your point you just made. So someone's asking, is the situational competency-based interview, so the Scbi, is it similar to the situational judgment test that many candidates would know? They may already been subjected to it, which most candidates really did not like. For those of you who don't know, that was a multiple choice computer-based test where they would present you in a paragraph of a situation, and then you would need to find the most suitable and the least suitable course of action. And yes, it's somewhat similar. So the Scbi has conceptually is somewhat similar, obviously with the difference that it's not computer-based in the sense that the answer options are not limited. You're really free to come up with your own ideas and your own solutions. And you try to certainly present the best possible solution. And you're not going to say, well, here is the best idea I have, and here's the worst idea I have. It's just you want to say, here is how I would solve that problem. But the concept as in presenting a situation, finding a good response, is rather similar. And here's another question: is the case study marked by computer or by people? It's marked by two people, and if the scores that they give you after evaluating it are very different, I don't know what's the benchmark for being very different, but if there's a huge gap between the scoring of one evaluator versus another evaluator, then a third person will come in and give their perspective. So it's a human evaluation. And again, there's this safety built in where two people would check it at least. And then a couple of words on preparation resources. So while I quickly scan through these, then with one corner, with the corner of my eye, I will look at other questions we have not answered yet. So we certainly have a lot of resources that we'd like to call your attention to. So we have webinars, a lot of free webinars that we've done over the years, specifically on case study. So if you're preparing for that phase, then you might want to check it out, Case Study Insights. And we also have case study simulations on an interface, which is exactly looking the way that EPSO's interface looks like in 5 languages. And we can, of course, provide you feedback as well if you'd like. And then, so we have for the competency-based interview resources, the oral presentation, motivational interview, which is another exam that we have not talked about, but motivational interview is an important part of the assessment center for almost all competitions. So that has its own quirks, and the kind of things you want to say or the kind of reasons you want to present why you would like to work for EU institutions, you probably want to give it some further thought. And again, check out those resources that we made available. Most are webinars with recording and transcript and all the rest. And then Tiziana also and her colleague Jan, they are available as coaches and trainers for all aspects of the assessment center. So it's one-on-one, and sometimes you also run for small groups. So different formats and editions are available. I don't know if you'd like to add something while I pick a few questions that I can answer after.
Yeah, so the group sessions, they are very, talking about the Scbi that we discussed today, they're very helpful because the groups are limited to 6 people, and we discuss each page of the assignment. So then it's interesting because you can see each other's perspective, and sometimes one thing that you were not aware of, the other colleague could bring to the table, and this could be something that could take you like a aha moment, give you an insight or something like that. And of course, the individual sessions that we do also, me and my colleague Jan, that we can focus on the assignment itself or the other like CBI or motivational interview, and things like that.
Yeah. So here's a question I just picked. So do we need to understand the technical side of the situation in the Scbi? So for instance, if the situation is about a particular directorate general in the commission, do we need to try to understand the nature of the work or the task? Or are the questions going to be really general and applicable to any field? I have my thoughts, but perhaps you want to answer that first.
Yeah, it is for any field, okay? And they are very clear when you have the assignment, the first page of the assignment, they say that you don't need to have any kind of expertise to solve that assignment. Okay, so it's really related to the behaviors, the competencies that András showed us during that session today. Okay, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Here's another one. After the 85 competition is announced, how much time do we have until the examinations to prepare? So I believe you're referring to upcoming exams that are being planned for probably in the next few weeks or months. How long you have? Well, the assessment center is definitely stage 2. So if there's a new competition announced, first it's typically the computer-based tests. So the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning tests, possibly one more depending on the competition. And those of you who pass that particular test or exam will proceed to the assessment center. So unless there's a so-called intermediate exam as well. So you usually have quite many weeks, a month or two between different phases and while they announce the results, and then they call you in for the next phase. So you do have quite some time to prepare for these different parts. What else? I'm still searching. Lenka, if I could just ask you in the background if you can feed some questions into my device, so it's on top of my list and I can quickly address it, questions that I may not have answered so far. So just a couple of words, and I promised you a special discount code. I don't want to let you down, so you might want to check out the Assessment Center book, which the latest edition was published last year, and there's a new edition coming out probably in 2 to 3 months. So hopefully the update will be on the virtual and physical bookshelves in 2 to 3 months. So if you don't have your exam until then, you might want to wait for the 2021 edition. And lots of Facebook groups where you can exchange ideas and best practices with your peers, with competitors, with friends, colleagues. We encourage you to check those out. And I'm looking at the question list while I keep on the screen the 20% discount code that you might want to use. So here's one. Do you think that interviews or assessment center may be organized before the case study written test in the field to gain time until COVID restrictions are over? That's a good question. If I had to guess, I'd say probably no. If I had to guess, typically case study precedes the rest of the assessment center. So typically they would organize that first, and the subsequent parts, the SCBI, the specialist interview, motivational interview, and all the rest, typically they would do that afterwards. So I don't think it's so much on a time efficiency thing. It's more about following a process and the sequence of the different steps. But again, it's my guess. Here's a question which Tiziana, I think is in your wheelhouse, which is how to improve to be how to improve to be to the point. So how to get to the point if STAR in the STAR system, when you want to talk about action, and camera and timer is not yet enough. Okay, so we talked about what methods you can use to improve in your ability to get to the point. And what if it's just not enough? This is related to the questions that we cannot practice beforehand. So what do you do with questions that are totally new in the SCBI exam live session? And you want to get to the point, but how do you practice for that?
So to get to the point, as you said, you have to practice. Okay, so by yourself or with me or my colleague Jan, okay, we can schedule also a coaching session. And then you have to practice, to also, as András said, with a timer just beside you, making questions, someone making questions to you that you're not really well prepared about how to answer those questions. Doing like a simulation would be a good way for you to practice. And see how you manage, so try to focus on exactly the keywords that they are asking you, and try to first just focus on that and check how was your timing in relation to that answer, okay? And if it's too concise, then you can start opening for more information, but first try to go straight to the point of the question.
Yeah, I think generally, if you practice getting to the point as a skill, if I may say, it even helps you for questions that are totally unexpected. Because if you do that consciously enough, that you have that discipline and that self-awareness, then your first reaction will be, okay, I'm not sure about the answer to this question, but here's how I would approach it. I think it's a fairly good, maybe just one of the many methods, but it's a fairly good method that you try to come up with maybe 3 steps or 3 parts for any answer that you have. And you can call it out by saying 1, 2, 3, but it helps your own thinking as if you were doing 3 bullet points or just the 3 steps for an answer, because immediately it shrinks that information that you would like to share with the assessors. So again, this requires practice. It's not like you can memorize it. You need to be on the ball in the situation, but it's something that that can definitely be improved over time. All right, here's the question.
I would say practice also, think about feedback, so it's good to listen to another person that are there with you, because sometimes you think, oh, I'm great, I'm super to the point, or you think, no, I'm not that great, I'm not straight to the point. But if you have a feedback from someone in the other side, would be positive, because then you can see how you are perceived by the others. Okay, so that's another hint that I give it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a question: is it possible to have more chance to be hired if we rank well? For most competitions, there's no ranking. So once you're on the reserve list, you are recruitable. You can get a specific job, but the ranking doesn't matter. For some competitions where there's a large number of candidates, they might do a so-called tier 1, tier 2, perhaps even more tiers. It's kind of a ranking, so that somewhat helps you, but it's rather the exception than the rule. And it's typically your background, your availability, perhaps the languages you speak. Those are the things that will matter, and not so much of how you performed in a given competition. So as long as you're on the reserve list, then a different mindset takes hold, a different priority takes hold from the recruiter's side, where they would just look at, are you a good candidate for the very specific job that I'm planning to fill? The motivational interview, how much time should we consider for each question? What do you say, Cecilia?
Yeah, I think I would work with the 3 minutes, answer as we practice for the CBI. Yeah, I would go for that.
Sure.
For the 3 minutes. EPSO competitions are really straight to the point, because they have so many people as well to interview and to move forward in their agenda. So they are very straight to the point to everyone. So I would be the more precise and objective as possible. And again, it's practice,
Yeah. For the motivational interview, you kind of know most of the questions in advance, so the kind of questions you can expect in advance. So it's not that difficult to really think through and come up with a good answer, because it's not going to take you by surprise, as it might, and again, might happen in the SCBI, where it's a bit more fluid and a bit more on occasion differs from one interview to the next. All right, maybe one more question before we finish off, or actually maybe two. I see there one. Is the field-related interview also 40 minutes? I'm a little uncertain. Maybe 30, maybe 40. I think it's a little shorter, but it's around that time. It's usually not longer. Yeah. SCBI, is it the same scenario for all the candidates in a given competition? Yes. So the background file is identical for all candidates in a given competition. So whoever is enrolled will get the same briefing. Obviously, the questions can largely differ, but the background file is identical.
I would like to give a hint. Yesterday was released the SCBI for the auditing competition. So if you would like to have a look, just for you to have a clue, the participants today, you can go there and maybe assess the link and check, what it is about. Normally it's a document with 20, the last one was 23 pages, now it's 24 pages. And then a lot of information for you to analyze, prioritize, and discuss. So maybe it's a good hint for you the curious one, to have a look and just to have a feeling, a flavor of it.
Yeah. Here's a question: if not every competition has a motivational interview in the assessment center, not necessarily every competition would have it, but most would. So the vast majority would have that. And then as a final point, so all of this online is, when you are by yourself, so to say, is for the assessment center. So for the computer-based test, the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning, it still happens in a test center, not at home, so to say. So with that, we wish you a lot of success for this particular competition and obviously for the entire assessment center. Please let us know if we can help with anything. If you have any follow-up questions, whether it's tomorrow or in a week, no problem, send us a mail. We or one of our colleagues will get back to you or point you to the resource that answers your question. And we'll probably be coming back with more resources and with more information and more training for the assessment center and the different exam types. And we're so glad to have Tiziana and along with Jan, who are our expert coaches who will guide you through this labyrinth. And we are there as a resource. We're there to encourage you and there to rejoice once you are on the reserve list and then you land a job. So with those words, thank you so much for being here, whether you watch it right now, the live version, or maybe the recording one day. This is valid as we speak. So 19th of January, 2021, things might change in the coming weeks or months, depending on the COVID situation and many other factors. But based on what we know right now, all of this is accurate to the best of our knowledge. So thank you so much for being here. A pleasure. Take care and to be continued. Tiziana.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
See you. Bye-bye.